Something that seems to have been lost on this modern generation that exists now is the understanding that relationships are a team sport. And one of the major factors I think that has played into this is the sitcom. I don't know if it's one of those things of art imitating life, or if it's life imitating art, or if there's even really that much of a difference between the two. But how almost all sitcom families and couples are adversarial, where the husband and the wife, the parents and the children, are in direct hostile competition with one another over just about everything. And that there's no clear leadership structure, there's no clear hierarchy of any kind, there's no clarity of who is in charge, or who or what has specific responsibilities in the family and such. And as a result, they are constantly opposing one another. They are constantly attacking and cutting each other down, usually in emotional, verbal exchanges, but also in a matter of that they're always trying to jockey with one another, compete with one another for the role of the authority figure. And that obviously most cartoons and etc. that are geared towards children make children the star of the show, where the parents are at best secondary characters, if they're even really all that important to begin with, but often they're more the obstacle for whoever the kids are in the series doing whatever it is that they want to do. They are the wet blanket, they are the whatever you want to say. But a product of this that we are seeing broad spectrum everywhere is the idea that my relationships with others are not my responsibility. That my relationships with other people, be it coworkers, be it relationship type, like romantic partnerships, or if it's with my family, they hold all of the responsibility to make this work. And that I am simply going to kind of go along with it. There's different manifestations of this. One is the box theory, the idea that when a woman goes on a date with a man specifically, that upon introduction, within the first 5 minutes to an hour, if it even lasts that long, of that date, that the man has compartmentalized that woman into one of three subconscious or overtly conscious categories, one of which is the basic ambivalence, just no real regard for them whatsoever. The second is the hookup box, basically the male version of a friend zone, the booty call. And then the third is the relationship material, girlfriend, maybe we'll see how this goes, maybe we have wife material later. And that the woman is never aware of her placement, and that once she's been compartmentalized, that she has no autonomy to shift that focus, to be able to change her taxonomy in this situation. And what this inevitably ends up doing is that it puts her in a victim role for the relationship. She's no longer autonomous. She no longer has any agency. And that if he just hooks up with her and moves on, or no matter how she behaves, regardless, she has no responsibility, she has no accountability, etc. And that no matter what happens, it just happens to her. On the other side, the friend zone and the incel concepts are both examples of this on the opposite end of the spectrum. They are the exact same thing, but it's the man who views himself as a victim instead. The MGTOW is another example of this, except that he's more of a hostile opponent than the incel / friend zone individual, who happens to be viewing himself more of a victim or hostage in the situation. So it's all over the place. But something I've seen a lot more of recently, I don't know, an undercurrent, I guess is what I'd call it, is the idea of just decaying bridges. The idea that if there's a bridge between you and another person that kind of physically embodies or metaphorizes the relationship between you and them, that you are not responsible to maintain that bridge, that relationship in any way. That if you just let it decay, then it's the responsibility of the other person to do 100% of the work to keep that avenue open. And if they don't do what you view to be their share, 100% of the work, possibly beyond that as well, doing your share, meaning about 150 to 200% of the work to keep this relationship alive, then of course it'll naturally decay into irrelevancy, leaving you alone with a victim mentality. And what's devastating about this is the fact that there's a lot of parents that have slowly slid into obscurity in the lives of their children because of the fact that the kid views the parent still as bearing this kind of responsibility dynamic. That there's a lot of people that view their girlfriends, their boyfriends, their husbands and wives this way. That if that other person doesn't do all the work to keep this relationship alive and happy, then you're more than happy to simply let it just let it decay and to watch it dissolve, rather than at any point grab a hammer and some nails and to start trying to repair the thing, until at times we find out that certain relationships are a lot more important than we thought they were. And by the time we finally reach a point of motivation to try to fix things, the decay has reached a point of no return. And then, of course, it collapses despite whatever best efforts you might put in at that late stage, and it collapses, leaving you now also with additional separate trauma of the failed rehabilitation, the failed recourse. And so now they'll often go to their next relationship, whatever that happens to be, with the mindset of, even if I do work on it, even if I do put in effort, it's still going to fail anyways. And so it becomes this devastating, negative, reductive spiral based on fact is that relationships have a lifespan. They have a life force, almost, you want to say, and that they do require effort daily to maintain, the same way that your human body does. You've got to feed it daily, give it water, give it nutrients, give it time and sunlight and everything else. But of course, a lot of these people are so emotionally impacted that they couldn't even keep a houseplant alive, much less barely keeping themselves alive, much less keeping a relationship with another person alive. And a lot of it as well, I see, is that it's a little bit of this social self-diagnosis stuff, that they believe themselves to have ADHD, they believe themselves to have whatever else. Doesn't even matter what their self-diagnosis of themselves happens to be, because they'll use that as a badge of excuse to allow themselves off the hook from doing their fair share. See, being ADHD, for example, is not an excuse to be filthy. It's actually a sign of necessity. What it means is that you're going to have to work harder. You don't have an excuse to do less. You might not like the fact that you have to work harder, but it doesn't matter. If you want to be healthy and you want to have emotional stability, you're going to have to do the work. It's not going to be very fulfilling. You need to do it anyways. Otherwise, the dishes are going to pile up, and the empty wrappers, and the everything else, and you're slowly going to spiral mentally. You're going to spiral in your bodily health as well, and no one will be to blame except for you. Except for you, and that you need to accept the responsibility that comes along with that diagnosis. And likelihood is, honestly, you need to actually go get a real one. You need to get a real diagnosis. And I imagine probably for a good 50% at least of the people that have self-diagnosed, what's going to happen is you're going to go to a professional, which you probably won't do, and that when you do that, what's going to happen instead is you're going to find out that no, you're not diagnosed. You're not actually a positive diagnosis of whatever it is you think you have. You have bad habits that you have nursed into a slave mastery role in your life, and you've allowed them to control you. And what you need is discipline. You need time controls. You need scheduling controls. You need health and relational controls to be put in that will hold you accountable. And that's actually the area where the church comes in. One of the things about church and accountability is that when you have real accountability, it won't let you wallow in your nonsense. That it'll call you out for your BS. And that in doing so, that act of love, of not allowing you to roll in your filth, results in you being healthier. Even though at the time, often it doesn't feel very good. It feels very judgmental. It feels very much like an attack against you, because many times we've internalized those negative things into a personality trait. I'm just this way. Well, in fact, not only are you not actually that way, you don't have to be either. That it's not a requirement or a necessity in order for you to function. That in fact, if you really want to function, you got to shed that stuff. So, all things summarized is that if you have relationships with others, you need to do work. You need to cooperate. That's the biblical model of marriage, wherein you have submission and you have respect. You have love and respect. You've got submission and affection and protection. Both, they're like the left hand and right hand, the left foot and right foot. They're like the dancer, which you have a lead and a follower. It's necessary for it to work in that fashion. And that when you get away from that natural and necessary relational dynamic, the only thing that is wrought is destruction.